Rod Decker, KUTV News.
Perfect.
Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to introduce Rod Decker. If you've lived in Utah, you're probably familiar with him, as he was a staple at KUTV Channel 2 News for almost 4 decades. He's retired from there now, and we're going to talk about this political history he's written about the history of the state here in Utah. It's a lot of fun, and we're going to talk about how Utah was once a swing state, especially in presidential elections, and now has turned solid Republican. How did that happen? Rod will answer that in just a minute. Check out our conversation.
All right, well, welcome to Gospel Tangents. I have an amazing guest. If you have lived in Utah, you must know my guest. So could you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Rod Decker.
And why would you be famous?
I used to be on TV. I'm retired now.
Very humble, I think. So how long, so you were, I do have people who are outside of Utah that may not be familiar with you, but you were at Channel 2 forever.
Channel 2 for, I don't know, 37 years, I believe. Yeah, 37 years. No, was it that? Yeah, 37 years.
Yeah, and so you were just like a staple of the Utah news.
Well,
market.
you hang around long enough, people get to know who you are.
Well, so tell us about your book. You've got a book here.
This is called Utah Politics, The Elephant in the Room, and it came out 1st of July, and I've been writing on it for 10 or 15 years, and it's about Utah politics.
Yeah. So go ahead, learn a little bit about your background. So did you go to school here?
I grew up in Utah.
Uh-huh.
I went to the University of Utah and graduated. I went to graduate school at the University of Chicago, where I was a wretched graduate student. I was a soldier in Vietnam. I attended Harvard for a year on what's called a Nieman Fellowship. Wonderful thing. They just give you some money and let you loaf.
Wow.
And then I worked at the Deseret News for 8 years as an editorial writer and columnist, a long time ago. And then I worked at Channel 2 for 37 years.
Wow, yeah, so that's awesome. So, one of the things I loved about your book is you kind of give us a history of politics here in Utah. And so, can you kind of give us kind of a history from, say, statehood to...
Okay, let's start before.
Okay.
Utah, this is about political history.
Right.
Utah political history divides into 3 phases, three periods. Territorial period, the mainstream period, which started at statehood and lasted till 1976, and the Republican ascendancy since 1976. Here's the secret. If Latter-day Saints and Americans agree about sex and families, then Utah's like everybody else politically. If they disagree, then Utah's different from everybody else politically. In the territory, they disagreed over polygamy. Utah was a pariah, kept away from statehood. They threw people in jail. They took the vote away from Utah women. Within Utah, there was a Latter-day Saint party and a non-Mormon party. The Latter-day Saint party almost always won. The non-Mormon party pretty often got their way anyway because the federal government was on their side.
Did they have names of these parties back then?
Yeah, there was the People's Party was the Latter-day Saint party, and the Liberal Party was the non-Mormon party.
Okay.
Statehood. Utah changes its parties so that they become Democrats and Republicans, and they mixed them up so that there were Latter-day Saints and non-Mormons in both parties. Strong 2-party competition. Utah for 80 years was in the American political mainstream. There were 20 presidential elections, 1896 to 1972. Utah voted with the majority of Americans, that's for the winner, 17 times. Only 3 states voted for more winners in those elections than Utah. Utah had two-party competition. Utah state government usually swung with national elections. It's hard to believe, but Utah was ordinary, politically kind of in the middle.
It's really hard to believe that now.
Yeah.
I mean, because I remember in your book you said that Utah was really a swing state.
Well, it was in those days. Political science professor Frank Jonas taught at the University of Utah. There was a saying, as Maine goes, so goes the nation, because Maine was on the very east coast, and its returns came in first, and people watched Maine and they thought usually the nation went that way. He made a joke about it. He said, as the nation goes, so goes Utah, because Utah voted mostly with the nation. Utah was a normal state. 1976 it changes. Utah gives up its tradition of voting mostly for winners and votes most strongly for the loser, President Gerald Ford, Republican, of any state. Next 4 elections, or including that, from Ford, Reagan, first Bush, Utah votes most strongly Republican of any state. Utah's had never voted most strongly for a candidate, either party, before. It becomes enduringly and strongly Republican. It has only voted Republican since then, and it has been the most Republican state in 7 of 11 presidential elections since then. Suddenly, okay, we were normal. Whoops, we're Republican. And it spreads throughout the state government. Our congressional delegation is now 5/6 Republican. We have 1 Democrat. He was just elected. He's in his first year. Before that, it was all Republican. The governor's Republican. The state legislature's Republican. Salt Lake City's Democratic. But the state is seriously and thoroughly Republican. Has been for years, and it doesn't seem to matter what happens. We stay Republican. Donald Trump was sort of an exception. Okay, what happened? We now have kind of what we had in the territory. We have a Latter-day Saint party. They're called Republicans instead of the People's Party. We have a non-Mormon party. They're called the Democrats instead of the Liberal Party. Latter-day Saints vote 70% Republican. If I told you how in 11 elections Utah was the most Republican state in 7 of them. If only non-Mormon votes had counted, no Mormon votes get to count. Utah is the most Democratic state for Al Gore. Utah is the second most Democratic state for Barack Obama, both times, even against Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney just gets wiped out in Utah. Utah is the 5th most Democratic state for Hillary Clinton. In Utah would have gone for Reagan the first time. Other than that, Utah would have been Democratic.
So you're saying that if we only counted non-Mormon votes?
Only non-Mormon votes.
Okay.
Utah is the most religiously polarized electorate of any state. We have Latter-day Saints, we have non-Mormons. We call them Democrats and Republicans, but pretty much it's a religious divide. Okay, so what happened? Well, first, Latter-day Saints changed. Latter-day Saints changed in 1976. That was the election after Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade was the Supreme Court decision that overturned abortion laws, including Utah's.
And that was in 1973, right?
73. Next presidential election, 76. You're right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. And before that, we were ordinary. After that, we were Republican. Now, it wasn't just that. Roe v. Wade came after a decade and a half or more of the sexual revolution. Sexual intercourse began in 1963.
In 1963 it began?
Which was rather late for me. Between the end of the Chatterley ban and the Beatles' first LP. Up till then, there'd only been a sort of bargaining. a wrangle for a ring, a shame that started at 16 and spread to everything. Suddenly the quarrel sank. Everyone felt the same. Every life became a brilliant breaking of the bank, a quite unlosable game. So life was never better than in 1963, though just too late for me. Between the end of the Chatterley Ban and the Beatles' first LP. That's Annus Mirabilis by Philip Larkin. But he's right. Sex changed in the 60s. The sexual revolutionaries cried sex, drugs, and rock and roll. An American woman born in 1942 has a 30% chance of having sex out of marriage before she's 21. An American woman born in 1955 has a 72% chance of having sex out of marriage before she's 21. 1968, 75% of Americans who have an opinion say sex out of marriage is either always wrong or almost always wrong. Early 1980s, as low as a third say that. Opinions changed, conduct changed, people married less. 1960, 72% of American adults were married. Now it's 48%. Okay. People had more sex outside marriage. People had fewer babies, but more of those babies outside marriage. 1965%, fewer than 5% of American babies outside of marriage. Now it's 42% of all American babies are born outside marriage. So you've got a big change in Frank Furstenberg, who's a family sociologist, says the American, and more broadly the Western, it happened in Europe too, and Australia, Canada, New Zealand, America, and more broadly the Western family, changed more in the last half of the 20th century than in any comparable period of time in history. Fast family change. And family change in a direction the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints didn't like. They believe in the traditional family. They believe in the old morality that sticks up for the traditional family. Essentially, sex should happen only between a married man and woman, no other sex. And they stuck to that. They emphasized it. They preached more about it than they had before. They issued the family a proclamation to the world saying how important traditional families were, and by extension, how important, they call it chastity, how important not having sex before marriage, how important faithfulness in marriage is, how important it is for traditional families and the morality that supports them. They got whopped. They got the Latter-day Saints don't realize what their political, what's happened to them politically in Utah, but here's what's happened. Abortion, pornography, censoring cable television, birth control for teenagers without telling their parents, gay marriage, one after another. And in every one of them, Utahns debated and fought and argued for 2 or 3 years. Then the legislature voted, almost surely, in most of the cases, they voted the considered preference of a majority of voters, a Latter-day Saint majority. And then in every case, the federal government, federal judges came along and said, no, you lose. In every single case. And in some of the cases, they invoked new interpretations of the Constitution. They said, or sometimes in birth control it was statute, but in most of it was Constitution, and in most of it was an evolving Constitution. So on an issue that was of fundamental importance, they argued, they debated, they decided, got thrown out, time after time. And they became Republicans, and serious Republicans. Non-Mormons face this Latter-day Saint Republican juggernaut, and they become Democrats.
And so it sounds to me like what you're saying here is up until pretty much probably 1973, Utahns were a swing state. Normal. They were normal. They were a swing state, but it's kind of between the tumultuous sexual revolution in the 60s and kind of the climax was really with the Roe v. Wade in 1973.
Well, okay, the court decisions made it political. They had opposed the sexual revolution, but what the heck?
Everybody was opposing it.
Yeah,
a lot of people were.
Everyone felt the same, says the poem. Every life, well, Latter-day Saints didn't feel the same, but it wasn't so much a political issue. It became a political issue with Roe v. Wade. Political scientists have looked at it. That's what gave rise to the Christian right, was Roe v. Wade. Before that, evangelicals were not especially political. Afterwards, they became seriously political, and evangelicals, Latter-day Saints, Pentecostals became a serious part of the Republican base. Here's what happened. Conservative religions became Republican. In America, evangelicals, Pentecostals, Latter-day Saints were about 25% of the population. In Utah, Latter-day Saints are 2/3 of the electorate. So what was a shift in America was a tsunami in Utah.
Okay.
And it still determines the outcome of our politics.
Well, now I want to ask you this question because I don't know if you know Dr. Matt Harris. He's a professor from Colorado State, Pueblo, but he's done a big biography on Ezra Taft Benson. And
Yeah.
so Benson was a very ultra-right
He was
Republican.
a strongly conservative man.
And so, could you talk a little bit, because he was very forceful in the 1960s. Can you talk about his influence on Utah politics?
Okay, I think he had some influence while he was alive. Well, actually, before he became president. Near as I could tell, once he became president, he shut up about politics. Part of it was he got senile toward the end, but part of it was he thought politics were important. But when he got to be president, he said, "Well, I'm running the Lord's work here. That's even more important." Mm-hmm. I think I never actually heard it. I never actually talked to him. Okay. I think that because he talked about politics a lot before he was president, and hardly at all after. I think.
Yeah, well, exactly, because I know Matt's documented a lot of the General Conference talks, especially because he was a staunch anti-communist.
He was pro-McCarthy.
Right.
Channel 2, where I worked, I didn't do it, but we did an interview with him where he said Joseph McCarthy was doing the Lord's work, and he was for Joseph McCarthy, who's a very controversial figure.
Oh, absolutely.
Most people say he was a witch hunter, is the normal thing. Okay, I don't think there is a theory. I'll think of her name in a minute. She's from Missouri, and she writes about Mormons. Jan something. Okay.
Jan Ships?
That's it.
Okay.
She wrote an article saying what changed Mormons was Ezra Taft Benson. Now, I just don't agree with that. I think Ezra Taft Benson had some influence while he was talking and politicking, but I don't think his influence has lasted. His conservatism was different from current Latter-day Saint conservatism. His conservatism was anti-federal government, which they are now, but it was strongly anti-communist. His son was state coordinator for the John Birch Society.
Yeah, Reed Benson.
Yeah, Ezra Taft Benson appeared on the cover of the John Birch Society magazine. His conservatism was for small government, though he went in as Secretary of Agriculture, and then he came out, and while he was in there, agriculture subsidies grew. He talked about cutting them, but in fact they grew. But he was, in theory, a cut the government man. he was strongly anti-communist. Now, current Latter-day Saint conservatism has hardly anything to do with anti-communism. I mean, the Latter-day Saints aren't communists, but there is not a proclamation to the world anti-communism. There is a proclamation to the world, the family. You don't hear. There were two sociologists who looked at General Conference talks. From 1970 to 2009, is that right? 1979 to 2009. Family was the second most important topic. Only Jesus Christ was more important. Okay, I don't think anti-communism even made it. I doubt.
But it sure was big in the 60s.
Yeah, it was big in the 60s. But that is the 60s were the 60s and they went away. Okay, the family's still here. The sexual revolution is still here. It's ongoing. We're still arguing over gay marriage. Parents still worry that about what their teenage sons and daughters may be doing, or the influences that may come on them. People still worry about pornography. That's here. That's now. That's something that affects people's lives, and I think affects Latter-day Saint votes.
Okay, well, I just want to follow up with one more question on President Benson, because he was such an anti-communist. What do you think he would think about our current president's approach towards Putin and Russia?
Well, Putin isn't a communist, so I don't know what he would think. I would think he would have difficulty with President Trump's morality, and Latter-day Saints have difficulty. Latter-day Saints voted 76% in 10 elections from 1976 through 2012. Utah Latter-day Saints voted 76% Republican. They were 7 out of 10 times they were the most Republican state. For Donald Trump, they voted 46% Republican. Now, they didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. They voted for Evan McMullin.
So if you combine Trump and McMullin, is that close to 76%?
Yeah, that's
still?
about what it is. Evan McMullin got 32% of the Latter-day Saint vote.
So he even beat Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, I think maybe so. 5% of the non-Mormon vote. A few votes in Idaho, 7% in Idaho, something like that. No votes anywhere else. He was a newcomer and so forth. So Trump bothered Latter-day Saints. The Deseret News said he should give up his candidacy. They editorialized against him. So Latter-day Saints have a problem with Trump's morality, though they're getting over it, evidently.
Just like all the other evangelicals.
But we'll see. Yeah.
Okay, so really, it looks like the sexual revolution and culminating with Roe v. Wade is really what changed Utah politics to be much more Republican.
Okay, Roe v. Wade, pornography, cable television, the Equal Rights Amendment, that's one that the Latter-day Saints want. The birth control for teenagers, gay marriage, just one after another, whomp, whomp, whomp. And each one of them refreshed Latter-day Saint distrust and estrangement from Washington, and each one of them pushed them again into a conservative position.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Rod Decker. In our next conversation, we'll talk about some events in the 20th century that led Utahns to become very skeptical of the federal government.
Then there were a series of controversies that are still going on, though less than they used to, over destroying nerve gas at Tooele, over a lab to test biological weapons at Dugway. The big one, the start of them, was the downwinder issue, where the United States tested atomic bombs in Nevada. The fallout drifted over southern Utah, and it was said thousands died.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please support Gospel Tangents and become a subscriber. For just $5 a month, go to patreon.com/gospeltangents, and you can hear the entire interview. And you can also get transcripts available at either our Amazon website, or if you want to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website at gospeltangents.com, and you can click the yellow subscribe button. Of course, we're also on Facebook, Twitter, and all the other places. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. And don't forget to click here to subscribe on YouTube, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again for listening.